Welcome to the Secret Emanate podcast. Here we will talk all things at the intersection of mysticism, business, imagination, and consciousness. It is also a window into the upcoming Emanate Business School for Mystics program, which runs from January 29th to April 11th. In this episode, we talk about being misunderstood when we are sharing from the multi-dimensional perspective. We also talk about the importance of redefining power, responsibility, and privilege from the eyes of the soul. I think that you'll be surprised by some of the insights that came through if you listen all the way through the end. I know I was. And I hope these messages serve you the way they served me as they were coming through. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Secret Emanation podcast. I actually recorded an entirely different podcast and none of the audio rendered. I am considering this a sign from the universe that was not the message that I was meant to share and not what wanted to come through. And I'm glad I listened because that entire podcast episode was all about power and responsibility. And shortly after the Power and Responsibility podcast that never was, the news of the fires in LA started to emerge in our community. And it reminded me of how tricky it is to talk about agency and power and the relationship between our perception and energetic mastery with our reality, with our felt experience. And there's something I want to say about meaning making from the soul's perspective. And I think this is something that gets overlooked time and time again. When we are in the perspective of our soul, I do not think the construct of blame and fault exists. I think there are some questions about relationships between events and patterns that we're seeing. But I think that when we are talking about blame and causation, that is a form of meaning making that is about trying to create a linear narrative, identifying good and bad, and the emotions that come along with a value judgment that have to do with whose fault something is. And I find it a very sticky and tricky experience to try and share about our energy's relationship to the things that happen in our lives when there are massive things happening in the collective that very literally victimize people. And speaking of the fires as an example, it's very logical to start thinking about the behaviors that we all engage in that contribute to the earth's detriment. And also, in a time of an acute crisis that people are still experiencing, looking at the perspective of the disembodied witnessing observer is not only very difficult and inaccessible at times, but sometimes it's just not appropriate. Like sometimes the basic needs of the felt experience are to be prioritized. And I think that as a species, we are getting closer and closer to creating an integration between what some people refer to as our higher self or witnessing observer and our human avatar, our body, our limited, individuated self. And at the same time, we're experiencing what it's like to have this connectivity through our technology to everyone in the world and knowing what's happening with them. We're sort of in this friction process where unity consciousness is not quite yet embodied. We're not quite yet there. And it's being formed through us. And we're learning, wow, what I do impacts people all the way across timelines and across the world. And the linear mind wants to create this controlled narrative around our impact and where we're headed in 2025, in my opinion, and in my way of tracking energy, is developing our ability to understand unity through a metaphysical lens without the control of the mind's need for rules and dogma and systems that are overly engineered. This is an extremely awkward birth time for consciousness across the collective because we're all learning by doing. We're all learning relationally and individually and collectively all at once. So we're all having to set aside our need to be seen a certain way or control the way we're perceived. And we're giving that control up to participate in the experiment of learning something new together and in relationship. And so when we are talking about power and responsibility, it's really important to think about how to redefine the shape of or assumptions we have about those things. We talk a lot about the power imbalances that happen in our economy with such few people hoarding resources, controlling norms in the way our industrial economy and data mining economy is functioning. And I have some controversial opinions about this. If you know me, you know I don't really revel in being a controversial person. I think that there are way too many people who inflame the collective nervous system to become visible. They exploit conflict to become extremely visible. I am not a huge fan of using tactics like that to gain attention because we already suffer from so much fragmentation in the collective and within ourselves. I don't have any desire to fan that particular energy. But the controversial thoughts I have are more just the truth of what I've observed and what's been extremely helpful to me, and that I know is very easy to misunderstand. So, one of the controversial ways I look at life is I think a lot about privilege from a metaphysical soul perspective. Obviously, it's important for us to have access to things like life saving care, like food that doesn't poison us, like the ability to take time to nurture our land and our elders and our children. But what about the kind of privilege that is seen in the soul's eyes? What about the privilege of being interconnected to all of creation that comes from a sense of compassion, a sense of love? What about the privilege of feeling connected to source, to spirit through being able to experience beauty in others? What about the privilege of having an active and gifted imagination that allows you to be curious about people who are not like you instead of afraid of them immediately? What about the privilege of having the tendency towards kindness that maybe we're born with? Why was I born with a desire for empathy in me that is easily accessible instead of not? I don't know. I didn't create that in myself. That is a sort of genetic lottery, energetic, genetic, or inherited or soul decided lottery to my human avatar, my access to that. Why are some of us born with a tendency towards hope? And why are some of us born with a deep belief that things can change and things can grow? Why are some of us born with a desire to synthesize the logical minds that we have and the intuitive abstract sensing skills that we have? Why? Why have some of us been able to meet friends and communities that we can easily create harmony with? Why do some of us have a gift of relating to people? Why do some of us have the privilege of being totally happy by ourselves and not needing to be constantly with other people. Each thing that we experience on some level is a spiritual privilege, because if each of us is a unique perspective that wouldn't exist in the universe, that's feeding information back into source consciousness, that's uploading that information into source consciousness by being who we are, then we're born unto a set of circumstances or privileges that the soul perceives, that the mind or that the human avatar may not even recognize and or may even see as something, quote, negative or disadvantageous. For example, I can really identify with the concept of being socially anxious. Social anxiety is something I used to manage when I was much younger through drinking and smoking weed and all that kind of stuff. And now that I'm older, it's much more difficult for me to manage because I am too sensitive in my body to mitigate myself in those ways. And it's not good for me. So I could say that on some level, I have the disadvantage of being distracted by and unfocused by a consistent desire to try to put myself in someone else's shoes, to try to help people wherever I go, or to be consistently sensorially overwhelmed by the feeling of how much information is in the field of any space I'm in, like the subway. I could say, why was I born this way? I can't do certain things that are so easy for other people. But then I know and remember that it is that exact feeling of oversensitivity, of empathy and compassion that allows me to sit across from someone in a one on one and find and just see the gift that they have in the world by being who they are. For 80% of the people I talk to, I immediately can see that. I can honor and see the gifts that they are holding and stewarding in their beingness because of this privilege I have of sensitivity. And the lens I'm using to look at my life, to look at myself, to perceive and evaluate myself are going to dictate what I see as valuable and what I see as disadvantageous or invaluable or even a detriment to me, right? So when we are thinking about the question, who am I on a deep level? This idea of soul purpose, this idea of what are my gifts? And we're looking at the question of power and responsibility. It's very important to learn how to toggle between the lived experience of limitation, where we get afraid, where we get nervous about other people perceiving us a certain way, where it's scary to feel disconnected or take risks, or where we feel, just the human condition reverberating through us and filtering our experience through that human condition in a very honest way. And the perspective of the expansive soul who feels so connected to the source of all creation that there's no dead end that exists. It's always a pathway. It's always just a pathway to another set of pathways. And when we decide to pit these aspects of us against each other and or decide to create a hierarchy, we create more resistance in the toggling between the two aspects than we need. And I'm oversimplifying this for the sake of it being legible to our mind, because there's probably many aspects and there's probably a lot of different ways to relate to and move through these parts of ourselves. But for the sake of being legible to the conscious mind, let's just say these two aspects are what we are playing with, what we are bridging when we are those who create businesses, which is a very real world construct, the business. There's a material exchange. There's a desire for the thing we exchange to materially take care of us in some kind of way, for something to be exchanged that is very formed. And the part of us that is streaming new forms of consciousness into being every day, minute to minute, moment by moment, the part of us that doesn't see time as linear or real, the part of us that is trying to interact with fields of knowing that there are not yet words or constructs for. As we bridge these within ourselves, we bridge them in the collective field of knowledge. So it's easier to hold. We're creating a bridge between the two so that the collective can also toggle back and forth, because the mind is so in desire of graspability. While we are learning to translate new frequencies in real time, there will be some people with ears to hear us and eyes to see us and hearts to feel us, and others who misunderstand, misfile, or miscategorize us. And then still others that are triggered by what we are saying, what we are sharing, and what we are modeling. And oftentimes, the desire to attack something different than you or that is outside the normative curvature of what your mind is expecting to happen is actually a response not to the fact that someone hates you, but to a person's tolerance for being brushed up with two things: the unknown and freedom of choice. When you offer a possibility or a way of behaving or a way of expressing that is outside the mental construct or imaginal somatic construct that somebody else has been held by in reality, that construct of reality that helps the other person feel safe and secure, when you do that, you are like a glitch in their matrix and you are showing them different trap doors. Imagine being in a video game and the pixels starting to get blurry and a different, more vibrant world kind of seeping into the flattened world you're living in. It's going to be disruptive. It's going to be scary to the part of you that likes to know where you are, what you're doing, and what that means about you. So when you have somebody near you or outside you in your externalized reality representing agency and choice and the existence of other planes of reality and the existence of other options that that person can choose, but that they cannot tolerate knowing about, they will see your attempt to open a window or a door into other realities as an attack on their existing reality. And because we tend to identify so much with our value systems of our culture, with identity constructs that have been given to us that are way more rigid than the way the soul wants to move through the world, we then feel personally attacked. And because our collective nervous system is very, very manipulated by entertainment, that's why the word entertainment and entrainment are so similar, and entertainment and train, and by this cascade of overstimulation that creates a disconnection from our subtle body, which is where our intuition lives. When we are faced with something that breaks us out of the known and thrusts us into the unfamiliar, or the possibility that what we thought was solid is not so solid, there's this backlog of emotional material and psychological energy and grief and fear and worry that sort of opens and spirals us and invites us into a spiral with it. And it's so important to be compassionate with ourselves about these things. Like, I don't know if I could do what I do in the world without having had a very hyper normative suburban high school experience in the 90s. I don't know if I could be as understanding of the people around me if I didn't bartend for years and years and spent time in the starving artist program. I don't think that it makes sense to judge myself for all of the programming I took on that taught me about the human experience and what's in the field for the human being and the challenges that it gives us to to teach us what what it means to be healthy, what it means to be fragmented, what we will trade for the desire to belong, and the ways that we are always sharing a consciousness, the way that just being in the world as a human impacts our consciousness. So it's so important to embark on this path of re-understanding who we are, birthing the new, and understanding the patterns of the past and the patterns of the now moment with a lot of compassion and non-judgment. And that is the thing I see missing in the trainings, in the field of healing, even sometimes even in the field of psychology. I'm not talking about the practitioners. I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the frameworks and the approaches and the way we talk about things, or the way we talk about things to ourselves. And when we are in the world to create a life that supports our soul's emanation, we're constantly learning the mind's frameworks and the rules of materiality while also being in a relationship with any information we come across where there's a spaciousness to disagree or question. It's always a relationship with information, a relationship with what we are perceiving as an authority in that moment. All things move in the field of spiritual meaning making because freedom is partially the ability to see everything from so many perspectives and choose which perspective feels most true, honors your heart most. And from the human perspective, there's a utility to. Something else I notice in those of us who come into the world very process oriented, very why oriented, very philosophically and artistically oriented is we can get lost in the sauce of understanding and forget the point of why we ask the question. And there's nothing wrong with that when you're in your eternal being where there is no clock of mortal time moving. But when you are human and your life has a clock to it, an ending and a beginning to it, getting lost in the question or the philosophizing does become detrimental to applying and integrating what you're learning into something that can be transmittable and exchangeable with the world around you, right? There is a time limit. And making space for the huge question asking part of ourselves, which is the spiritual part of ourselves, which is the eternal creative part of ourselves, making space for that part of us to breathe without being exploited, which doesn't really exist that much in the world. Creativity is generally exploited. in this reality, in a desire to make space for creativity to breathe, we can kind of overcorrect. We can overcorrect. And then all of a sudden, in the abstract world, we're feeling transcendent and amorphously in touch with the great mystery of life, but we don't know how to organize our time or how to put one foot in front of the other. And I do think that maybe there's a experiential place you can reach where you're so present with every moment where you don't even need to think about the mind's way of sequencing things. But I don't know anyone who actually has that personally. And I don't think that's most people who I know's goal, to wait for us to achieve that. I think there's a way to bridge things a little percentage by little percentage, and that these small shifts create gigantic shifts in our timelines. And I want to say that this idea of working with your service in the world being centered around your soul emanation, it's not necessarily like universally applicable. There might be people who don't need to do that. There might be people who, in fact, become distracted by that idea, and it's not really necessary for them to do what they do in the world. And then there are those of us who are obsessed with it. We're learning about our astrology, we're learning about our human design, our Enneagram, our Myers, but we're trying to understand what our frequency is in a way our mind can hold on to a little bit, trying to bridge this memory, this knowingness that I came here for a specific reason. And there's just us knowing that intuitively, and the minds need to have a plan. And that's what I've been living inside for the last 10 years. And it's not always easy, but for some of us, it's our soul's devotional path to remember that mission and to actualize that mission through our creativity, through sharing our emanation, through sharing our frequency. And that is a space that I have learned to create for myself that I am so excited to hold for you. And the reason I brought so many other teachers into Emanate is because holding that space for us is not something we're meant to learn how to perfect and engineer. It comes through the synchronicities and community of life moving together and apart, together and apart. All the people that I curated into this team have sort of shown up in my reality, representing different perspectives and skills that I can't give you by myself. And that's the future and the ancient past and the present. That's this interconnection and interdependence through being what we are and who we are. That is a path to removing all kinds of control, domination, and security programs that have taught us that to be safe, we need to be controlled. That idea is a manifestation of the mind's inability to trust the heart's way of leading. So, this is basically a heart field for you to start to tune into a form of intelligence and creation. It goes way beyond the mind's understanding of linear steps, while also doing the parts of linear business that are necessary to be anchored on the planet in materiality. So that's what I wanted to share. If I think about the path I've been on for at least the last 10 years, it's very literally unbelievable to a part of me. I have to sort of snap out of my day to day sometimes to really appreciate life's ability to surprise us with all the lessons we need, all the miracles we need, all the connections and skills and gifts and remembrances and talents we need if we are willing to engage, if we are willing to invest and engage with ourselves. And it's so cheesy to say this, but one of the things that I have been learning, and it never really goes away, is that we don't really know how to respect ourselves. And that's why it's so hard to respect other people. And that's why it's so hard to nurture and nourish and understand our purpose and our gifts, because the baseline level of respect of what the human experience is missing, covered over, manipulated, and degraded. Being human is such a spiritual initiation and a deeply challenging and courage making experience for the type of people I work with, who are super sensitive, very unique, abstract, and highly motivated to change the world in ways that are with their nature. So, thank you for listening. I hope this has been useful. Emanate starts on January 29th, and we are allowing people to register up until January 27th at midnight Eastern Time. The doors are closed. I really want to encourage you to just check out some of the teachings of the people that I have brought into this space. And I hope to see you there if this time is for you. A lot of people are asking me if this is going to come back again. Look, I don't know. We have to see what happens with this seed. And if this seed grows and it feels needed and it feels useful and it feels vibrant, then we'll do it again. There'll be a new curriculum, probably new teachers. But if you feel resonant with what I shared here, I encourage you to explore the offering, and I hope to see some of you there. And if you aren't coming with us, I really hope that something in this has resonated with you. And thank you for your time. And I hope that you will take what resonates with you today and allow it to move into your life to really bring new opportunity and new inspiration into your day and week ahead. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Emanate is open through January 27th at midnight Eastern Time. To register, go to mythsofcreation.com/emanate or click the link below.